Welcome to Get Your Bell Rung. My name is KG. With me tonight is a doctor and author, Dr. Jeremy Housewright. His book, if you can see it, there you go. It is called For the Love of the Show. Volumes 1 and 2 are out. I've read them both. Very good, very a great read. How are you, Jeremy?
I'm great. How are you?
Man, I'm doing good. Like I said earlier, if I can just stay cool, this
Yeah.
weather's kicking my butt, man. So let's
Yeah, man.
what um what is your background? Let's go over that first.
So I have been involved in journalism for 25 years. I got a undergrad degree in journalism back in 2005 and actually was hired to cover high school football right out of high school. Friday nights, man, I still do it to this day. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I started out doing that and got a full-time sports writing job for a couple of years, then decided to go back to school and get my education degree. And did that for 17 years, got a master's and a doctorate, and just recently left education and went into a new career field. And but I still do the journalism thing a lot. I take photos at a lot of concerts and events and sporting events, and still write. And so that's my big passion. I don't think I'll ever stop doing that in some capacity.
Right. Where did wrestling come in?
I was 7 years old, and my grandfather took me to my first live event. It was a house show at the Kiel Opera House here in St. Louis, and the main event was Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff, and I became a Hulkamaniac immediately. So, which pains me to say, knowing how he is now, but he's the I fully admit he's the reason I became a wrestling fan. If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, none of my writing, the wrestling books and any of that would ever have come to be.
Right. And what's interesting is the book For the Love of the Show, you're not just writing about one particular wrestler, a biography, if you will. You're actually talking and getting fans telling you stories as a collective. How did you come up with this idea of doing this?
It began with my travels. I do a lot of media for WWE at times, and I traveled to different cities covering shows. And in my travels, I met some very close friends out in LA, from Canada, Chicago, places like that. And the only time we get together is for wrestling shows. And throughout those travels we had some crazy moments. If you read the first book, you probably know about the hotel where they were making meth out in Orlando for WrestleMania 33. um so I had all these stories, and I'm like, this would make kind of an interesting read. And I knew I didn't have enough just on my own, so I'm like, I can find some people, I'm sure, with great stories to tell. And so that's how this all began, really. I knew from the get-go that I wanted to include Izzy Moreno in the first book, just because I listened to Busted Open, and I really liked whenever she would call in. And then after her, it was like kind of an open book. I just looked for people with interesting stories who I thought would be a good addition to a first book, and went from there.
Yeah, and it's funny you brought up Izzy because I was going to actually ask you to share that story because I love that story. It started off, from a fan to a professional wrestler. Do you mind sharing that?
No, not at all. She was one of the more challenging stories for me to get, actually, because she has a management team that handles all her media obligations. And when I reached out to them, well, when I first reached out, I didn't hear anything from her. And I'm, being a journalist, I don't take kindly to being told no or not being spoken to. So I kept bothering her, say, and finally I got an email from her management team, and they asked me to give them a call. So I called them, I think, a couple days later, and I was really skeptical because they wanted all the questions, and that's one thing that I don't do. Never.
Jeremy, I think we lost you for a moment. Yeah, you froze up on me.
So,
Hey, Jeremy, if you could hear me,
can you hear me?
now I can. Yes, yes. Missed the whole thing. Oh, nope, lost you again. Let's see. All right, you're back
You there?
now. Yep, yep, yep. Can you
There
hear
you
me
are.
okay? Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, yeah,
Um,
missed the whole thing.
so and anyway, as I was talking to her people, they wanted all the questions up front,
Right.
and that's one thing that I don't like to do. But I decided, since it's for the book, I'll go ahead and do it. So I sent them literally a list of about 40 or 50 questions,
Mhm.
and they called me back, and they're like, this sounds like a really good idea. We'd like her to be involved, and I'm like, okay, great. And so I gave her a call one day, and we talked for probably about 3 or 4 hours on the phone. Just not even just all the questions. I didn't get through half the questions, honestly. It was just talking about her life. I found it very intriguing that she basically had uprooted herself and left her family to go pursue a dream to be a pro wrestler. So she was awesome. She was very personable, very fun to talk to. If you've ever seen her or heard her on the radio, that's her in real life. I mean, there's no dog and pony show. That's legit Izzy. So she was awesome, though. I think the world of her, and I wish her nothing but the best.
Right. My favorite chapter, and I think it was volume one that I have here. You talked about, I think it was chapter 8, leaving your mark. It was about Bray Wyatt.
Yeah.
Uh, were you able to meet Bray Wyatt?
No, he's one of the wrestlers that I've never had the chance to meet. I was a huge Bray Wyatt fan.
Right.
Being, and I talk about that in the book, being a big guy. There's not a lot of pro wrestlers that are popular that look like me. And Bray was one of those guys who wasn't a body guy. And he was just one of the most creative guys that I had seen. And I happen to live real close to Washington, Missouri, about 15 minutes away. And I knew of a tattoo artist out there named Kyle Scarborough, who's very well known in the wrestling community. And now he's very well known in like heavy metal music community as well. And I saw that he was posting stuff about Bray Wyatt. And this is right when Bray came out with The Fiend. And I saw he had posted a photo of the lantern. And it really piqued my interest because I'm like, well, maybe he just drew it, And so I reached out to him, and he goes, oh no, he goes, I came up with the artistic drawings for everything. So at first I was gonna just do a feature on him for my website that I run. And so I talked to Kyle, and I ran the article on the website. And while I was writing this book, I thought, you know what? Kyle's story is actually really cool. I think I'll include that as well. So I basically just took what I had, maybe added a little bit to it, but that was it. And what was crazy is I was literally putting the finishing touches together on the book, and Bray passed away.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, crap. I'm gonna have to go back and redo some of this. So I called up Kyle, and Kyle was heartbroken. I mean, Bray and Kyle were buds. When Bray would come into town, him and Braun Strowman and Buddy Matthews would all go get ink work done from Kyle. In fact, if you ever seen the skull on Bray's hand,
Hmm.
that's done by Kyle.
Oh, wow.
He's very good. Kyle is very good at what he does. In fact, I think he only takes appointments now. I don't even know if he has it. He used to have his own shop in Washington. I think he shut it down, and now he just does by appointment at his home. He's that well known. Um, but he also allowed me to have some text messages between him and Bray, and some of his artistic work that he had done, just as like mock write-ups. So I included what I could in the book that I had room for, and yeah, that was that probably is my favorite part of that book, because it really meant a lot that he took the time to talk to me about that, and I know he was upset when we were talking at times, because like I said, they were very close, and
Right.
but that was a guy that really, as a pro wrestler, he was one of my favorites. And I will be the first to admit, I hate what they're doing now with the Wyatt Six. I think it's absolutely horrible. Um, there's people that love it, and hey,
Right.
if you like it, great. But I think it's a cheap ripoff, and I don't think Bray would be happy with it at all.
Yeah, that's my problem with it. It's not so much the idea that they had about doing it; it's how they're booking it,
Right.
and it's not being done properly. I personally believe that the Wyatt Six should not be a although they just got back on TV. Don't get me wrong, but they shouldn't be booked every weekend. This type of thing should almost be like, watching the Andre the Giant, where you only get to
Yeah.
see it at certain times, because then you could allow they could book them better, I believe, doing it that way. Um, so and I could be wrong, but from what I remember when I was reading some things about you, the reasons why you wrote these books and the stories you got from the fans had to do with the impact that professional wrestling can have on people health wise.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk about that. Explain that to everyone.
So it didn't. It was by chance that this transpired. The first book, so I guess I should tell everyone, the first book and the second book are completely different. They are not related. You don't have to
Right.
read the first one before the second one. That's a common
Thankfully,
misconception.
yeah, I was gonna say thankfully because I ended up reading the second one before I did the first one on the way back from St. Louis when my wife was driving. I picked it up and started reading. And I actually paused for a second and I was like, I wonder if I should be reading the first one first. But then I remember you told me I didn't have to read them in any type of order. So
Yeah.
thankfully that's the case. Go ahead.
So yeah, with the first one, that has nothing to do with really health, anything like that.
Mhm.
The second book, though, when I see, I'd never planned on writing a second book. It again, it happened by chance. I was already working on a totally different topic, and a bunch of people had come up to me and they're like, "You need to do a second book," and I'm like, "Well, I don't know if I really want to." It was a lot of work, and there were a lot of things with the first book that I didn't like. I had hired an editor for the first book because I don't always feel comfortable editing my own work,
Mhm.
and that was a mistake. He missed a lot of things that normal readers won't even notice,
Mhm.
but I notice them, and that kind of ruins the first book a little bit for me. Not that I don't like it.
Right.
I'm very proud of it, but there are some parts of it that I wish I could go back and change. Um, but so with the second book, after I kind of got sold on the idea, um, I had interviewed a gentleman from the United Kingdom, and he had started working with DDP, with his DDP yoga to drop some weight. And I had just moved back from Kansas City. I'd moved out to Kansas City for a year on my own and was driving back and forth to St. Louis on the weekends. And I just had quit working out. I quit taking care of myself, and I was in a bad way. I was way, way overweight. And, I didn't realize it. I knew it, but it wasn't honestly until I was at SummerSlam in Detroit covering that. I took a couple photos with Shayna Baszler and Ricochet. And when I looked at the photos, I was just like, holy shit. I'm like, I look like total crap. Like, I was embarrassed. And it was the point where I wasn't going out anymore. I was staying home. I'd go to work and go home, and that was it. And, I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without being out of breath and so forth. And so when I talked to the gentleman from the UK, it kind of lit a fire under me. And, I've always liked DDP, and I think he's a very inspiring individual. And so after I did the interview with the guy from the UK and started writing his chapter, I just decided, you know what, January 1st of 2024, I'm going to change. Like, it's all going to start all over. And I knew it was going to be a struggle. But I found a new doctor to go to, and he kind of motivated me. And I give him a little shout out in the beginning of the book, of the second book. And he hasn't seen it yet. So I'm going to be seeing him in July. So he'll get a copy then. But, he motivated me to get off my ass and to do something. And it wasn't easy. It's still not. I mean, I'm still working, but I've lost over 130 pounds
Wow. Congratulations.
since then. Thank you. But yeah, I mean, I credit him with being the catalyst for really starting me on the path. And it's difficult. It is. It's it's a day-to-day thing. And I've learned a lot about myself in this process that I didn't really think about in the past, because through high school I had dropped weight, and in college I've dropped weight and then gained it, but I would never really think about the mental aspect of it, and that's a big part of it. And I tell people, and I'm not sliding personal trainers by any means, but
Right.
I tell them, I'm like, you can give someone the workout sessions and whatever, but you're not going to be truly effective until you've walked in their shoes. And
Right.
I refuse to take advice from somebody who's been 180 pounds their entire life, and who's fit and trim, because they don't understand. They don't understand what the addiction is like. And it is an addiction. It's
No,
no different than being addicted to cocaine or
right.
cigarettes or
Right.
booze or
Right.
whatever. It truly is.
Yeah.
And
I mean, look,
yeah,
I get exactly where you're coming from.
yeah,
I've always been a guy. Well, I had weight issues when I was a kid.
hmm,
And when I 16 years old, I started to grow, and I shredded all of that. Then I started
yeah,
working out. And 12 years ago, I was probably in the best shape of my life.
hmm,
And then in 2017, I was involved in an accident that disabled me for the rest of my life.
hmm,
So I was bedridden for a long time, told I'd never walk again without a walker. Food became my comfort
yeah,
for because of depression. It became my comfort because I was hurting really bad.
yep,
Next thing you know, I 120 pounds more than what I
hmm,
was when I first injured myself. Um, and I was able to lose it because I pushed myself.
yeah,
But then I gained not all of it back, but a good bit of it back, right? And I get what you're saying, because right now I'm going through that. I've never struggled to lose weight. I've always been able to lose it. And now, because I'm not as active as what I used to be, I'm 52 years old now. I struggle with that. I'm about 260 pounds, try to get back to about 230. So I understand exactly what you're saying, because when you go to someone who has been in shape. They're most of the time they're young.
Yeah.
It's hard to take them seriously.
Hmm.
Not that they don't know what they're talking about, but like you
Yeah.
said, they've not walked in the shoes that you've walked into. Not everyone who suffers with weight loss or with gaining weight or with weight issues. Not everyone that has these issues are people who are eating a dozen eggs in the morning and a pound of
Right.
bacon.
Right.
Because my wife is amazed that I am as big as I am because I don't eat a whole lot, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
That's just our bodies. That
Yeah.
type of a thing. Um, but I'm gonna go back to how did professional wrestling? I know you mentioned DDP. You mentioned your doctor, who's your catalyst for motivating you. How did
Yeah.
professional wrestling help you get there?
I think just seeing these guys on a weekly basis. Like I said, those two photos that I took with Shayna Baszler and Ricochet, I have them posted on my wall right over here. And like I said, they disgust me. But when I'm feeling like, you know what, I've worked as hard as I possibly can, I will look at those photos and I'll be like, you can work harder.
Right.
So I use them as a motivation. Um, but I look at guys like Bronson Reed, who I consider one of the best big men in the business. I love the guy. I know there's a lot of people who don't like like what he does, but if you followed him in Japan, you realize how great of a in-ring performer he really is.
And he's young. Can you
And he's
imagine
young.
what he's going to be in 5 years?
Exactly. Um, so I love watching the big men. That's just that's my favorite thing about pro wrestling, and no disrespect to the small guys, the high flyers or whatever. They have their place, and I respect them, and I enjoy watching them. But to me, there's nothing better than watching two big guys like a Brody King, who's one of my, again, I'm not a big AEW guy, but Brody King is one of my guys who I wish we could get over into WWE, because I think it's a shame that he has not been a world champion in AEW. It's really a travesty.
I agree. So you talk about big man professional wrestling, and I've been saying this for a long time. It seems to me that a lot of times, being a big guy in professional wrestling can be a curse, especially now that we're not in the Vince McMahon days.
Yeah.
And sometimes it boggles my brain how they book. I mean, you brought up Brody King, right? Um, and I was just talking to my co-host about this. How am I supposed to suspend my disbelief to the point of a Darby Allen beating a Brody King? And that's what annoys me about professional wrestling right now is a lot of the
Yeah.
things that they do doesn't make sense. And yeah, there's an argument. Well, you look at Rey Mysterio being, the Big Show.
Sure.
There are certain little guys that okay, you can buy it either because of their particular background, they grew up in the streets fighting or whatnot. Rey Mysterio is one of those guys.
Yeah.
But that is one of my pet peeves is how they book certain big guys in professional wrestling to
Yeah.
be enhanced talents. So I get what you're saying because when you have a Bray Wyatt come along, who is one of the bigger guys, he's kind of an average guy. If you really think about what the average guy looks like in the
Yeah.
United States, they're not these ripped, cut up guys. They're the me and you, the Bray Wyatts. So for someone to come along like Bray Wyatt and to be as successful as he was, yeah, that was a massive, massive blow. I think to just the average guy
Yeah.
that's a professional wrestling fan when we lost him because he did represent so many people who are not represented in professional wrestling, I believe.
Yeah.
Right.
And to that point, that takes me back to when I was at WrestleMania 35 and Kofi Kingston won the title. And I look over and there's this guy, an African American fella, and he's in tears. And I was never a huge Kofi guy.
Mhm.
The whole Kofi Mania thing I thought was just a blatant ripoff of the Daniel Bryan, but whatever.
Right.
I look at this guy and he's in tears, and I said, dude, what are you crying for? He's like, finally somebody that looks like me is a champion. And that's always stuck with me because when Bray finally won that title and was a champion, that is exactly how I felt. It's like, finally, I can watch somebody who I can, you know, see a
Right.
similarity in. And
Right.
that's always stuck with me.
Right. Well, and I think that's why, and you mentioned in your book, in actually chapter 6, the ref,
Mm-hmm.
you brought up the 80s and the era and being your favorite and being, I think it's one of the greatest eras. And I think one of the reasons is because these guys look like normal guys. And I'm going to
Yeah.
get to that in a second to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me the difference between writing the first one and the second one, and which one was more difficult for you to write and why?
I think, first of all, the difference between them is the second book is full of motivational and inspirational stories. And that was my goal. I was, I had been working out and losing the weight when I started writing the second book. And one thing I tell people is I've cut out all the negative crap in my life.
Right.
Family members, former friends, jobs. If it was negative, it's gone. And so I wanted this second book to be nothing but positive. Not that the first book was negative by any means, but I
Right.
wanted all these stories to be. If you've ever seen the Chicken Soup for the Soul books,
Mm-hmm.
I recently told a guy I did a radio interview with, he asked me what my book was similar to, and I was laughing. I said, I'd say Chicken Soup for the Soul, man. And he's like, what? And I'm like, they're all inspirational stories. They will make you feel good. Every
Mm-hmm.
single story in this book will either have you laughing, it will have you wanting to get up and go do something to get active, and it may even make you cry a little bit. And I told him, I said, I was literally in tears writing some of these chapters because they hit that close to home for me. So that was the biggest difference. And as far as the most difficult, I would say they both had their challenges. The first book was challenging because it was my first book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing half the time, to be honest with you. Um, the second book, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. Um, and I knew I wanted to handle everything myself, which made it extremely difficult because I had never formatted a book. I've formatted websites, I formatted newspapers. A book is a totally different monster. And that's what everybody told me from the get go. They're like, you're going to need to hire someone to format the book. And I'm like, no. Tell me I can't do something and you're going to get it done. And I told people there were days where I spent 8 hours straight just looking at 2 or 3 pages,
Mm-hmm.
formatting them back and forth
Wow.
until they were perfect. So the time that I put in on the second book is far and away more than the first book. And that's what made it challenging was the time that I spent on it. And trying to get the second book out to non-wrestling fans.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's a challenge, and it's still a challenge that I'm dealing with, because I've had a number of readers who aren't wrestling fans read the book and they love it, and they're shocked that they love it,
Right.
and because they know absolutely nothing about pro wrestling other than who Hulk Hogan was.
Mm-hmm.
And when they pick up the second book and they come to me and they tell me that they loved it, that is the ultimate compliment for me. And
Right.
that's been the biggest struggle is trying to get non-wrestling fans to check it out.
Right. Man, it's like you've read some of the questions I want to go to because you're making it easy to segue into it. Because you talked about a couple of things. You talked about negativity and how you're kind of getting that, out
Yep.
of your life. And then you brought up wrestling fans. It seems like today, negativity and wrestling fans, certain wrestling fans, they go hand to hand,
Yes.
sadly enough. with writing your books and going out and talking to wrestling fans, did you struggle with having to deal with a lot of negativity from fans? And how did you find wrestling fans? Because there is such a stigma about people being professional wrestling fans. They are pretty much described as idiot, uneducated, poor white trash. Not that they're not people of color in professional wrestling, because there are, but
Yeah.
white trash is what's really just kind of sticks out with professional wrestling. So, how did you find people who were willing to admit they were wrestling fans?
That was a struggle at first. Um, but I think once people found out about me and they knew that, yeah, I've been a wrestling fan my entire life. I have 5 degrees and a doctorate or whatever. And at the time I was a teacher. I've been an assistant principal or whatever. They were very open to talking to me because I think there's still that stigma out there, and there's some people who are kind of closeted wrestling fans, and they're scared to come out of the woodwork because they're like, I'm a lawyer, and it's probably not a good look for me to be talking about pro
Right.
wrestling in the office, you know. And that's some things that I ran into, in the second book. One of the guys, and I'll actually be hanging out with him Friday night in Kansas City. He's a television news anchor, and I met him at a wrestling match. He was sitting right next to me at a SmackDown. That's how we met, and just from talking to him over the last couple of years, I got to learn that he wanted to become a professional wrestler,
Wow.
and he has started to do that. And he wrestles for a group called Trailblazer Wrestling out of Kansas City. So, you know, I, yeah, I think, finding the people. There were a lot of people who wanted to be in the book. There were a
Right.
lot of people who thought they had great stories because, and that's just
Right.
as human beings, we like to tell stories. We like to talk about ourselves.
Hmm.
Whoever says they don't like to talk about themselves, they're full of crap because you get somebody that'll listen to you, you're going to tell them about yourself. That's
Right.
just what we like to do. Um, so there was no shortage of people who wanted to talk to me, and I felt bad because there were a lot of stories I didn't put in the book
Mhm.
just because they didn't fit what I was looking for. And it was no disrespect to anybody, and I truly hope no one felt slighted or disrespected who may have taken the time to talk to me because their story didn't make it, because it wasn't personal. It was,
Right.
I knew what I was looking for from the get go, and not everybody fit that mold, and that's okay.
Right.
I just enjoyed getting to meet all these people and talk to them, and you know, go outside the country. I talked to my buddy from Africa, and then my buddy from the UK. So, and that's what's been special about this second book, and even the first one. I've maintained relationships with everyone that I've written about, especially from the second book. I
Mhm.
talk to a lot of them still on a weekly basis and keep in touch with them, which to me, that means a lot because I definitely feel like we have a friendship. So to me, it's important to stay in touch with all of them.
Right. Now, I'll go back to the negativity part though, because again, I mean, wrestling fans drive me nuts today. Um, was it difficult finding people who are not negative, who are actually positive?
You know, I think as long as I asked them the right questions, I was able to keep the negativity out of it, because a lot of us are fans of certain brands.
Hmm.
I make no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I don't like AEW. I can't stand the product, and I loved it when it first started. I think it's totally crap now, and not the in ring product,
Hmm.
the television product.
Right.
I love watching the guys in the ring. And in fact, I tell people, if you compare them in WWE, AEW blows WWE out of the water with their in ring
And ring.
product.
Right.
But
100%.
everything else is trash.
Yeah, I've always said that I watch, because I'm an AEW guy and a
Mhm.
WWE guy, but I'm a
Yeah,
TNA guy, I'm a NWA guy. But
sure.
I watch AEW and WWE for two totally different reasons.
Mhm.
WWE is
Right.
where I get my field of really good storylines, right?
Yes.
AEW is where I get my field that I need with professional wrestling inside of the ring. But I
Yes.
agree with what you're saying though as well. Um, you know, but is it the negativity from the fans today? Is it just truly about the two different brands? Because I
No,
just feel like
no.
wrestling fans are just so different than what we were back in the '80s, man. I
You
mean, look,
have you have fans, for instance, I get crap about wearing this shirt.
right,
I don't apologize to anybody.
mhm,
It's what I think.
right,
I'm not going to apologize to some guy who walks up, oh, I can't believe you're wearing that, blah, blah, blah. I don't watch wrestling for political views, and
exactly,
unfortunately, you're starting to see that with TKO taking over WWE. Like, I was a huge UFC fan for years. I've covered them. I've interviewed Dana White several times. Um, I can't watch them now because they're constantly parading a certain politician right up next to the octagon and having every single fighter who comes in kiss the dude's rear end.
mhm,
I don't want to see that.
right,
I don't care if he's Democrat, Republican, or in between. I don't want to see that. I want to see these two guys fight. And to me, that's taken away from each of them fighters.
right,
And that ain't right. And I'm starting to see that with the WWE now, because now you're starting to hear more about, who Triple H is politically affiliated with, who Stephanie's politically affiliated with, who certain wrestlers support. I don't want to know that.
right,
I watch pro wrestling to escape from reality. The last thing I want to know is, hey, this wrestler is, you know, stomping on the trail for this politician. I don't need to hear that. Keep sports and politics separate.
separate,
And it to me, it's very it's very two-faced of the UFC to do what they're doing,
mhm,
because years ago they were like, yeah, we're keeping politics out, blah blah blah. Well, how is it any different now?
right,
And shame on those fans who support that, because they're the ones who will complain, we don't want to hear about Pride Night. We don't want to hear about this and that. Well, what you're cheering for now, or who you're cheering for now at the Octagon, is no different.
right,
And you can't have it both ways. So it's either you keep it out or it's going to be flooded. And I have a fear that it's going to start to be flooded because it's become such a mainstream product.
right,
If I'm a politician, I'd want my face plastered around on a table that they're going
mhm,
to pull out from under the ring next to a Slim Jim logo, which again sickens me. It
right.
the other I think that was Friday night, they pulled out that, I think it was when Cena,
Table,
before he
you know,
cut the pipe bomb
yep,
2 promo, pulls
right,
out that table plastered with the Slim Jim logos. I'm like, I sat there, I'm like, oh my god, like this is awful. Like, not what happened, but having them logos
right.
on the table, I'm like, this isn't good. Like,
Yeah, I
you
mean,
can,
you know,
you
it,
know,
it's funny because the last 10 years of WWE with Vince McMahon, the product, it was getting, it's hard to watch just because I think he was out of touch, right?
yes,
But I'll be honest with you, it's one of those things that you don't, know what you have until it's going. There's parts of me that misses Vince McMahon
yes,
because of the things like he didn't believe in advertising on the ring or on the
right,
tables or anything else. He believed in pure sports entertainment in his head, but
yep,
professional wrestling. So there's parts of him that I do miss because I think that TKO is out of touch with the wrestling fans in their own way.
yep.
Wrestling fans are blue collar workers for the most part. They can't afford $40,000 tickets for a
Thank
seat. I
you.
mean, it's ridiculous where it has gone. So I agree with you. Um, in chapter 6, you talk. It's called the ref, and you bring up the '80s. Um,
Mhm.
People will say that, oh well, we're just getting old. This is why we say, oh, we don't like the current product. Um, where do you think, at what point, wrestling took that turn away from what they were doing in the '80s? Now, for myself, I wasn't a WWF fan in the '80s. I grew up watching Mid South Wrestling, Southern Wrestling,
Yep.
where it wasn't gimmicky in the fact of you didn't have Papa Shango and goofy stuff
Yeah.
like that, right?
Right.
Um, so were you a fan of these gimmick cartoon characters by WWF back
No.
then?
No. In fact, you know, Hulk Hogan was my guy, and I was a loyal WWF guy up until the late '80s. Um, Once Bret Hart became champion, and no disrespect to Bret Hart, again, great in-ring
Right.
performer. Personality wise, I could get a better personality from a piece of paper. And I hate to say it, but it to me he just wasn't entertaining. Um, Especially at my age. I was
Right.
just becoming a teenager. Wrestling wasn't cool when you got into eighth grade in high school. You
Right.
know, I mean, it was all about playing sports and hanging out with girls at the mall and stuff. And pro wrestling didn't fit in at the time. Now, so I strayed away from it until the Attitude Era.
Mhm.
And I had a buddy who came into high school one day and he had on a Austin 316 shirt, and it piqued my interest. I'm like, what is that? I'm like, is that some Bible thing? I'm like, I knew what John 316 was, but he's
Right.
like, no, man. He's like, this is WWF. I go, really? He goes, Stone Cold Steve Austin. I go, wait a minute. I go, Stunning Steve Austin? He goes, no, no, man. I don't even know. He didn't even know who Stunning Steve Austin was. And I'm like, I remember watching Stunning Steve Austin back in the day. I'm like, he was okay. I mean, he wasn't anyone that I'd really pay to go see, but he was cool. But uh, I remember that Monday night I went home and I turned on Raw and I saw Stone Cold come out and slamming beers and giving the middle finger and then, throw DX in there. Because I always liked Shawn Michaels anyway. I was a big Rockers fan
Mhm.
back in the day. And then I saw, when I saw Shawn Michaels then, I'm like, oh my God, what happened to Shawn Michaels? He got like mean and like he just don't give a crap. And I was hooked. And it wasn't a month later, I went to my first show and it was a house show. And it was like going to a rock concert, man.
Mhm.
It was, I mean, literally, they had, I tell people this DX came out, you had Michaels, you had Triple H, X Pac, Road Dogg, and Billy Gunn. They come out and they had a camera and they were having women pull up their shirts in the crowd and flash them like a concert. I'm like, and 16-year-old kid, I was like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever.
Right.
I'm like, I'm gonna watch every week, and I did. I would tape it on nights I couldn't watch it, or I got into Hogan again when he went to NWO. So I would switch back and forth, or I would watch one and I would record the other one on my VCR and then watch it afterward. So because I had to know what happened on both of them going to
Mhm.
school Tuesday, so I'd stay up late Monday nights watching till like midnight or 1 in the morning, and then I could go to school and talk to the other guys about what happened on both of them. So that's what got me back into it, and I've been hooked ever since. I've never stopped watching. Now there's been some years it's been hard. The I can admit the early John Cena years were tough to watch some of them. Um, but I got through it, and I don't think I'll ever quit watching. I think I'll always be a fan of some company, and like you, I like the other companies. I'm a big TNA guy. Although I don't understand the whole Joe Hendry.
Oh, don't get me started.
I don't get it. I I I don't know. It's just not for me. But I also liked NWA. Um, and I follow some indie stuff around St. Louis. So
Right. Right.
yeah, I try to stay up on everything. And like I said, I don't watch AEW hardly at all. I try to stay up on what's going on because I'm a big Swerve Strickland guy.
Mhm.
He's one of my favorite performers over there. Of course, I like watching the what's his name, the high flyer they got.
Oh,
He's Australian guy or whatever. Will
yeah,
Ospreay.
we all spray. Yeah.
I'd pay anything to watch him live. I saw him live here in St. Louis one time, and he was awesome. And I wasn't a fan going in. I still don't think he's great on the mic,
Mhm.
but he makes up for it in the ring.
Right.
Um, I worry about him. Him and Darby.
Yep.
I'm not a big Darby guy, but I do respect what he does. But I worry that he's not going to live to see 45 or 50.
Yeah,
So
not just because of professional wrestling. I mean, the kid went and he just climbed Mount Everest.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
He
he's
he hey, he lives it hard, man. So props to him. I mean, but woo, I
yeah.
I think I'd take a few months off.
So, as a writer, if you were able to pick a one professional wrestler, doesn't matter if it's you know past, current, what promotion doesn't matter. Is there a particular one that you would love to be able to cover and write his story?
Ooh, yeah. Um, I feel like there's a few that are misunderstood. Um, I'm a big CM Punk fan.
Mhm.
I love him. Um, Anytime somebody says something bad about him, it's usually because they don't know him at all. They just go by what they read on the internet. And I tell people I've had the good fortune to, interview him 3 different times, and he's never been anything but gracious
Right.
and friendly. Um, Maybe him, Randy Orton, since he's from St. Louis, and I feel like he also, you know, they tell his story, but it's all awful watered down when
Mhm.
you hear his life story from WWE. It's a lot of fluff. Um, and then Mick Foley, I just love Mick. One of the sweetest pro wrestlers I've ever been able to work with. Just a very down to earth guy, and he's very intelligent, and which is what I really respect about him is he's a writer.
Right.
So just being able to pick his brain and hear how he came up with the stories that he's written and things like that would be very cool. So probably those. Now, if you're talking like historical, like importance,
Mhm.
I think somebody like Bruiser Brody, um, who's well known around here in the Midwest
Right.
and
Right.
especially in St. Louis,
Yep.
but a lot of people may not know who he is, and that's a shame because he was one of the first big men to really hit it big. So if he were still around, being able to talk to him would be something special.
Yeah. What do you think is missing in wrestling today that we had in wrestling back in our era, the late '80s into the '90s?
You know, it killed a lot of them from the '80s, but I think just the drive to be on the show, to be on the card. Nowadays, I don't want to say you're handed a spot because that's not true, but it seems like each major promotion has their 5 or 6 guys that they feature week in and week out for 20, 30 minutes at a time on TV. And then after that, who do we see?
Right.
So that's what I respected more about the 80s is those guys didn't have a choice. Either they worked their tails off, some of them worked twice a day and traveled to get paid, where now a lot of them are on guaranteed deals.
Right.
And I think that takes away from the motivation. And let's face it, not all of them are pro wrestling fans either. And that, you can say what you want, but if you're not a fan of what you do,
Right.
it will eventually show. You
Yep.
know, I mean, you can't do a job day in and day out for 20 years and not be a fan of what you're doing. You
Right.
know, and that shows with some of these guys, is because
Hmm.
there's some of them who, if they were not doing what they were doing, they would have nothing to do with pro wrestling at all.
Right.
And
Right.
those are the guys that I have a tough time watching.
Yep. Yep. That's true. Uh, are you planning on doing another project as far as writing another book? And if so, do you have an idea of what you may be doing?
Yeah. So the question I get all the time is, are you going to write a third for the love of the show? And the thing I tell people is, in pro wrestling, we're told to never say never.
Right.
So I'm not going to say I never will. However, I, I'm pretty sure that won't be my next venture. I'm leaning toward, so there's two options that I have right now on the table. The first one was what I was working on before I started this book, and I can talk about it. It's not a big deal, but
Yep.
it is again, everything I'm going to do is nonfiction. I've never been a big fiction reader other than Stephen King.
Right.
So I can't see myself writing fiction if I don't really like reading fiction.
Mhm.
Um, so everything I'll do will be nonfiction. But I was working on a story idea that revolved around a painting that a woman from Illinois had created several years ago. She had lost her brother and cousin, maybe. They both drowned. And so she was an artist, so she would paint to use it as like an outlet. So she was also very religious, and she made this painting of like these crosses on a hill, and she started passing them around to people who were battling cancer. And a friend of mine, the gentleman who was the best man in my wedding, told me about this, and he was kind of involved with it, passing the painting around to different people from our hometown, Columbia, Illinois. And he called me up. He goes, "Hey, would you want to come along? We're going to pass the painting along to the next person." And so what would happen is, the woman who was passing it had beat breast cancer. And every time a person would get the painting, they would sign a message on the back of it. So when I saw it, there was probably like 10 messages already signed on the back. And not everyone has survived, unfortunately. There was a police
Mm.
officer who passed away of cancer, but his wife and kids signed a message to the next person. Um, so I went with them this day, and they were giving it to a 7-year-old girl. And I don't have kids. I'm not particularly fond of young kids, but it, it broke my heart. I can remember I went home that day and I was crying because I'm like, this, I mean, this little blonde girl looked like a little Barbie doll. And
Right.
to see her having to deal with what she was dealing with, I'm just like, this isn't right. And she wound up beating it, and they passed it on to another young child, I think like an 8-year-old boy,
Mhm.
who is currently still fighting it. But so I was thinking about writing about that and doing a whole book over that. Um, if not that, then I am going to write basically my story about battling weight loss. And because what has happened in the process of this is I needed a way to keep myself accountable,
Mhm.
because that's part of the battle, is holding
Right.
yourself accountable on a daily basis. So I, the first day I worked out, I took a picture of myself and put it on Facebook. And I put hashtag accountability, hashtag boots to asses, kind of honoring The Rock a
Right.
little bit. And every day I do it. I've been doing it now for since January 1st, 2024, every day. Um, and it's gotten big enough to where people come up to me and they have told me that I have played a role in motivating them.
Nice.
And I've had people calling me asking me, "Hey man, what are you doing? You know,
Right.
what do you do to do this, to keep yourself motivated and blah blah blah." And so I've really thought about telling my story because there's a lot to talk about that people don't know.
Hmm.
There's stuff from my childhood that my mom doesn't even know about
Right.
that has directly impacted how I, you know, my eating habits and why I overate and why I didn't take care of myself as well as I did. There's stuff that my own mom doesn't even know about.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, I think that this story needs to be told, if anything, because I always think about teenagers, because that for me that was the hardest time. I think about, and when I was teaching high school, I used to see some of the kids in the hallway, and I'd always try to be buddies with them and try to create relationships with them to where they could come to me if they needed advice on things and stuff like that. And so I think about kids like that, and I'm like, if they had a story like this, maybe it would motivate them to make some changes early enough to where they're not going to be 42 years old and deciding to
Right.
do this and being in that much pain every day when they get up from working out, or something like that. So I don't know, it's going to be I might do both.
Right.
I have a little less time now than what I had for the first two books, but I could definitely I could do both of them. I just have to space them out.
Right. Well, they both sound like they would be amazing books. Thank you for taking the time to come on my podcast. I really appreciate it. You're a very remarkable person. I know you've been doing a lot of book signings. Is there anything that you want to push, plug?
Yeah, I will be in Kansas City Saturday and Sunday at the Anime Verse Fest, Wrestleverse Fest at the KC Expo Center, um, along with legends like Sting, Lex Luger, Soraya, Orange Cassidy, um, let's see, Kevin Nash. And then there's going to be a ton of anime people who I know nothing about. And what's funny is, I used to look at the anime group and I'd be like, these guys are weird. I don't understand this stuff. But then I thought about it and I'm like, you know what? They're no different than pro wrestling fans.
Nope.
So it's
That's
gonna
right.
be a strange weekend, but I think it's gonna be fun. I'm gonna get to go back to Kauffman Stadium and catch my Royals play, which I haven't got to see them play live in the K in probably 2.5 years.
Wow.
So I'm looking forward to that on Friday night. But yeah, Saturday and Sunday you'll be able to catch me at the Anime Wrestle Fest. So yeah.
Awesome. Are you going to be? Are you a member of the Cauliflower Eye Club by chance?
I'm I wish I could go. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get off work since I started my new job. I
Right
was
job.
hoping to go because I know Mick's gonna be out there, and I'm like, man, I need to reconnect with Mick to talk to him and do a sit down with him because you know uh, talking to fellow authors is always a treat for
Hmm.
me. Just to see different things that they do that maybe I would try next time. So, but yeah, one of these years I'm going to get out there. I talked to Herb Simmons about going out there this year. I just don't think I'm going to have the time off to do it. So hopefully next year I'll be able to get out there because I do want to get involved with that. I've been
Right.
meaning to, and I just haven't been able to find the time to do it.
Yep. Yep. I hear you, man. It's hard. It's hard coming up with times to do all of these things. Uh, but by chance, if you end up coming, it'll be great to see you.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're always welcome. If there's anything you ever want to plug, you want to come on to talk, man, just hit me up. You're always welcome. And again, guys, for the love of the show, two books, one and two. And as Dr. Housewright said, you don't have to read them in order. Trust me, you really don't. I've read both of them, and they're very, very both really quick reads. I mean, that's just how good they are. So I appreciate it. Uh, Tomorrow, check out all of us, Bob Cook, the Hall of Famer. I can officially say he is now the Hall of Famer. He was inducted this weekend. Mark, George Strong, myself, and JT Storm, we will be doing the recap of Monday Night Raw. So please join us. Don't forget to subscribe. I hope everyone has a great week. Dr. Housewright, thank you once again, my man. I really enjoyed
Thanks
it.
for having me. Appreciate it.
Good night, everybody.